To remove the access panel, slide the access panel latch to the unlocked position. Grasp the handle on the side of the panel and pull slightly to the rear before pulling up on the back of the panel. Remove the panel from the unit. The access panel has several tabs on its side. And leading edges, which fit into slots and under the front lip of the PC. There are also two tabs on the rear inside edge that slide into slots on the rear of the chassis. Note that the rear tabs can get bent easily and make it difficult to replace the panel. Before replacement, make sure the rear tabs are unbent and in a parallel position to the surface of the panel. There is also a small slot on the rear of the panel that a lock slot on the PC slides into. To reattach the panel, align the tabs on the panel over their corresponding slots on the PC. Slide the panel forward until the forward edge of the panel is flush against the main bezel, and the access panel latch snaps into place. To remove the optical drive, first remove the access panel. Detach the power and data cables from the rear of the optical drive. Press on the green drive release latch at the rear of the drive and slide the drive out the front of the unit. If you are installing a new optical drive, pull the green drive release latch off of the optical drive. Insert a straightened paper clip or other similar tool into the force eject hole on the optical drive to eject the drive tray. Pry and push out on the tabs securing the bezel to the optical drive and remove the bezel from the drive. The optical drive bezel has several tabs that fit into slots on the front of the optical drive. To install a new optical drive, press the old optical drive bezel onto the optical drive until the tabs are secured. There are two small pins on the green drive release latch that fit into small holes on the side of the optical drive. Press the pins into their holes to secure the latch to the new optical drive. Slide the drive into its drive bay through the front of the PC until the green release latch snaps into place. Replace the power and data cables to the rear of the drive. To remove an expansion card if present in the unit, first remove the access panel. Remove any external connectors from the expansion card, such as wireless antennas. Detach any internal connectors to other system components. Lift the latch for the expansion card's retaining bracket and swing the bracket out. Press down on the latch for the PCI x16 slot on the motherboard if removing a card from the PCI x16 slot. Carefully pull out the expansion card. To replace an expansion card, carefully align and push the card into its slot on the motherboard until it is fully seated. Rotate the expansion card's retaining bracket back into place to secure the card. Attach any internal connectors necessary to other system components. Attach any external connectors if necessary, such as external wireless antennas. To remove the hard drive cage and 3.5-inch hard drive, first remove the access panel. Pull the hard drive power connector out of its cable guide on the cage. Push the green hard drive cage release latch toward the top of the unit and swing up the inside edge of the cage. Disconnect the power and data connectors from the rear of the drive, or drives, in the cage. Slide the cage slightly towards the center of the unit and lift it out of the PC. If replacing the 3.5-inch hard drive, pull out on the green drive release latch for the hard drive bay on the cage and slide the drive out of the cage, pulling out again on the latch for the second set of guide screws to release the drive. Detach the 4 Torx 15 shock-mounted screws on the sides of the hard drive and reserve. To install a new 3.5-inch hard drive, install the reserved shock-mounted guide screws on the sides of the new hard drive. If installing an additional hard drive into the cage, a second set of guide screws can be found on the top of the optical drive cage in the PC. The guide screws on the hard drive align into rails on the drive cage. To install the drive, slide the drive into the cage until both sets of guide screws have snapped into place past the green latch. There are 2 pegs on each side of the hard drive cage. Let's slide into slots on the frame of the PC. There is also a small edge on the hard drive cage that the green drive release latch rests on top of when the cage is correctly installed. To replace the hard drive cage, slide the 2 front side pegs of the cage into their slots. Replace the connectors to the hard drive in the cage. Swing down the inside edge of the cage until the green drive latch snaps into place over its edge. Press the hard drive power cable back into its guide on the hard drive cage. To remove the heatsink, first remove the access panel. Detach the heatsink connector to the motherboard. Loosen the 4 captured Torx 15 screws for the heatsink and gently pull the heatsink out of the PC. Before replacing the heatsink into the system, first clean off the old thermal grease from the microprocessor. Clean the grease from the heatsink if you are replacing the same heatsink into the system. Apply new thermal grease or a thermal pad to the microprocessor. Align the 4 screws of the heatsink over the 4 screw holes on the motherboard. Tighten the 4 Torx 15 heatsink screws. Replace the heatsink connector to the motherboard. To remove the CPU, first remove the access panel and the heatsink. Press down to release the CPU load lever from its retention tab, and pull the load lever and load plate away from the socket. Identify pin 1 on the socket by the mark on the corner of the socket stencil. Line up the pin 1 corner of the Intel CPU removal replacement tool over the socket. Press down on the plunger of the removal tool to pick up the CPU from the socket and remove the tool and the CPU from the motherboard. To replace the CPU, first identify pin 1 position on the microprocessor by noting the yellow mark on the corner of the chip assembly. Make sure the Intel CPU staging tool side pins are set to the correct socket type for the CPU. For this unit, it is LGA1151. Place the CPU into the Intel CPU staging tool. When correctly inserted, the small notches on the side of the CPU should align over the side pins on the staging tool. Place the removal replacement tool over the stage, lining up the pin 1 triangles on each tool. Press down on the removal replacement tool to pick the CPU up from the stage. Align the removal replacement tool again to pin 1 on the motherboard CPU socket. Press the plunger on the removal replacement tool to release the CPU into the socket. Swing the load plate down. Lock the load lever under its retaining tab to secure the microprocessor into place. To remove the hood sensor, first remove the access panel. Disconnect the hood sensor connector from the motherboard. Slide the hood sensor out of its cutout on the rear edge of the PC and remove it from the unit. The top edges of the hood sensor slide over a cutout on the rear of the PC. To replace the hood sensor, slide the hood sensor edges over the cutout until secure. Reattach the hood sensor connector to the motherboard. To remove the power supply, first remove the access panel and the hard drive cage. Then detach all power connectors to the motherboard. Note that some of the motherboard connectors have a latch that must be pressed to release the connectors. Free the top power supply connector from its cable guide at the top inside wall of the chassis. Remove the connectors from the cable guide near the bottom of the cable tunnel inside the unit, and pull the top connector down through the cable tunnel. Free all the power supply connectors from the remaining cable guide on the inside chassis wall. Next, detach the 3 Torx 15 screws that connect the power supply to the PC. Press the latch at the inside edge of the power supply in the unit, and slide the power supply into the PC before fully removing it from the unit. There is a slot on the side of the power supply that slides over a large tab on the side wall of the chassis. To replace the power supply, align the power supply slot slightly behind the chassis tab. Then slide the power supply back until it locks into place next to the latch. Reattach the 3 Torx 15 screws at the rear of the chassis. Secure the power connectors into the bottom cable guide on the inside chassis wall. Feed the top power supply connector up through the cable tunnel and secure with other connectors in the cable guide near the bottom of the cable tunnel. Secure the top power supply connector in the top cable guide on the inside chassis wall. Reconnect all power connectors to the motherboard. To remove the main bezel or the dust filter bezel, first remove the access panel. Unlatch the 3 side tabs of the main bezel and rotate the bezel away from the PC. Some units will have a dust filter bezel attached to the main bezel. To replace the main bezel or the dust filter bezel in these units, pry the 2 bezels apart until they separate. If installing a new dust filter bezel, press and snap the dust filter bezel onto the main bezel until all edges of the bezels are flush. The main bezel has 3 hooked tabs on the right side and 3 tabs with cutouts on the left side, which fit over tabs and over alignment posts on the chassis. To replace the main bezel, align the hooked tabs on the right side of the bezel over their tabs, then rotate and press the left side of the bezel until the cutout tabs snap over their posts. To remove the combined front I/O panel and power switch, first remove the access panel, the main bezel, and the hard drive cage. Detach the 5 front I/O and power switch connectors from the motherboard. Free the connectors from the cable guide on the side wall of the PC. Detach the Torx head screw securing the front I/O and power switch module to the front of the unit. Swing out the top of the front I/O module, then pull out on the bottom to disengage it from the front of the chassis. Pull the connectors out the front of the unit. The combined front I/O and power switch has 2 tabs at the bottom edge that fit into small slots on the front of the PC. To reinstall the front I/O panel and power switch, first feed the connectors in through the front of the unit. Align the tabs of the front I/O panel into their slots, then swing and press the top into place. Secure the front I/O panel and power switch with its Torx head screw. Secure the connectors for the front I/O and power switch into their cable guides on the side wall of the PC. Reattach the 5 connectors that run from the front I/O panel to the motherboard. To remove a PS2 and serial port module if present in the unit, first remove the access panel. Lift the latch for the expansion card's retaining bracket and swing the bracket out. Detach the connector for the PS2 and serial port module from the motherboard. Carefully remove the module from the unit. To replace a PS2 and serial port module, align the back slot edge of the adapter into its position at the rear of the unit. Reattach the connector to the motherboard. Rotate the expansion card's retaining bracket back into place to secure the adapter. To remove the single serial port riser module, if installed in the unit, first remove the access panel. Detach the serial port connector to the motherboard. Detach the 2 hex nuts on the rear of the chassis for the serial port module using a 3/16 hex socket driver. Pull the single serial port module out of the unit. To replace the single serial port module, align the serial port into its cutout at the rear of the unit. Secure the serial port module to the chassis with its 2 hex nuts. Replace the serial port module connector to the motherboard. To remove the solenoid lock assembly, first remove the access panel. Disconnect the solenoid lock connector from the motherboard. Detach the 2 Torx 15 security screws that secure the solenoid lock assembly to the rear of the unit. Note you will need a screw bit with a hollow tip to remove the security screws. Remove the solenoid lock assembly from the unit. There is a small guide on the rear of the PC that an edge of the solenoid lock rests on. To replace the solenoid lock assembly, place the assembly against the rear inside wall of the chassis, aligning the edge of the lock onto its guide. Replace the two Torx 15 security screws to secure the lock to the unit. Reconnect the solenoid lock connector to the motherboard. To remove the speaker, first remove the access panel and the hard drive cage. Detach the speaker connector to the motherboard. Feed the connector down through the cable tunnel at the front of the unit. Remove the Torx 15 screw on the inside front wall of the PC that secures the speaker to the front of the PC. Slide the speaker to the side and remove it from the unit. There are 3 guides on the inside front of the PC that the edges of the speaker slide under. To replace the speaker, press the speaker onto the front wall of the PC slightly to the side of its usual position. Slide the speaker over until it fits under its guides. Replace the Torx 15 screw at the bottom corner of the speaker to secure it to the unit. Feed the speaker connector up through the cable tunnel at the front of the unit. Replace the speaker connector to the motherboard. To replace the system fan, first remove the access panel. Next, detach the fan connector to the motherboard. Remove the 3 Phillips No. 2 screws that attach the fan to the rear of the PC. Keep your hand on the fan as you remove the last screw to keep it from falling. Then pull the fan out of the PC. There is a hole on the bottom inside corner of the system fan that aligns over a small post on the rear of the PC. To replace the system fan, align the fan so it is blowing outward. The label on the fan should be facing out of the system. The connector should be on the inside chassis wall side of the unit. Align the hole of the fan over its screw post and align the screws of the fan with the screw holes at the rear of the PC. Secure the fan to the rear of the PC with its 3 Phillips No. 2 screws. Make sure the hood sensor cable is not trapped by the fan against the rear wall of the PC. Reattach the fan connector to the motherboard. To replace the DisplayPort module if installed on the motherboard, first remove the access panel and the system fan. Detach the 2 Phillips No. 1 screws securing the module to the motherboard. Pull the module off of the motherboard and out of the unit. There is a connector on the DisplayPort module that fits into a connector on the motherboard. To replace the module, press the connector edge of the DisplayPort module onto the motherboard connector. Secure the DisplayPort module to the motherboard with its 2 Phillips No. 1 screws. To replace system memory, first remove the access panel. It may also be easier to access the memory by detaching the connectors from the optical drive. Simultaneously push down on the clips on either side of the DDR4 DIMM socket to release the memory module. Carefully pull out the memory module. There is one notch on the bottom of every DDR4 DIMM module, offset from the center, that fits over a tab in the DDR4 DIMM memory socket. When installing DDR4 DIMMs, align the notch on the module with the tab in the socket. Press the module into the socket until the clips on both sides of the socket lock into place. Replace the connectors to the rear of the optical drive if they were removed for access to the memory. To remove the wireless LAN antennas, first remove the access panel, the main bezel, and the hard drive cage. Carefully snap off the antennas from the wireless LAN board. Remove the rear antenna cable from the cable guides on the inside wall of the chassis, removing the tape securing it as well to the inside and top walls of the chassis. There is a hooked tab securing the rear antenna cover into place. Squeeze the tab to release one side of the cover and pull the cover off of the unit. Detach the Torx 15 screw for the rear antenna and pull the antenna out of the rear of the unit. Untape the front antenna cable from the inside chassis wall. Detach the Torx 15 screw for the front antenna and pull the front antenna out of the unit. Each antenna has a small hole that fits over a small alignment peg on the front or rear of the PC. To replace the front antenna, feed the antenna cable in through its stenciled access hole and align the hole on the antenna over its alignment peg. Secure the front antenna with its Torx 15 screw. Tape the antenna to the inside wall of the chassis. Feed the rear antenna in through its access hole at the rear of the unit. Align its hole over its peg and secure the rear antenna with its Torx 15 screw. The rear antenna cover has two small tabs on one side and a hooked tab on the other that fit into slots on the rear of the unit. To replace the cover, insert the two small tabs into their slots, then press the hooked tab into its slot until the cover is securely in place. Tape the rear antenna cable to the top and inside walls of the unit, securing it in its cable guides as well. Replace the antennas to the wireless LAN board. The antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN board. To remove the wireless LAN board, first remove the access panel and the hard drive cage. Carefully snap off the antenna connectors from the wireless LAN board. Detach the Phillips number 1 screw securing the wireless LAN board in place. The board will pop up. Remove the board. The wireless LAN board has a notch offset from the center that aligns over a key in its motherboard socket. To replace the wireless LAN board, angle the board into its motherboard socket at a 30-degree angle and press down. Hold it down while replacing the screw. Replace the antenna connectors to the board. The antenna connectors are labeled 1 and 2 and should be connected to the corresponding 1 and 2 labeled ports on the wireless LAN board. CMOS factory settings should be restored as a first step before replacing the system motherboard. To restore CMOS factory settings, first remove the access panel and the nearby memory module. Slide the optical drive forward for better access to the battery. Remove the battery from the motherboard. Wait 30 seconds. Replace the battery to the motherboard. Slide the optical drive back into position. CMOS factory settings are now reset. Note that you will now need to enter System BIOS and reset the clock in BIOS after this procedure. To remove the motherboard, first remove the access panel and the hard drive cage. Remove any expansion cards or riser modules. System memory, and the wireless LAN board. If a DisplayPort module is installed, remove the system fan and the DisplayPort module. Remove the heatsink and the CPU. When removing the CPU, install a socket cover on the load plate window before replacing the load plate over the socket. Detach all system connectors to the motherboard. Remove the connectors from the solenoid lock and/or the single serial port riser module if either are installed at the rear of the unit. Remove the 8 Torx 15 screws that attach the motherboard to the PC. Note that you will need a slender barreled screwdriver to access one of the top corner screws through the optical drive cage. Lift the motherboard slightly. Slide it toward the center of the unit, then tip the motherboard up and remove it carefully from the unit. Place the motherboard in an anti-static bag. There are several clips on the inside of the chassis to help align the motherboard in the chassis. To replace the motherboard, carefully tip the front edge of the motherboard into the unit. Clear connectors away from the edges of the board as you place the motherboard down into the unit, sliding it into its rear port cutouts and within the guide clips on the chassis. Replace the 8 Torx 15 screws to secure the motherboard to the unit. Replace the connector to the solenoid lock and/or the single serial port riser module if present in the unit. Replace all connectors to the motherboard.